Ever wondered if you could legally murder someone for snoring? Did medieval people really have laws about farting in public? Were there actual rules about how many times you could bathe per year? Number 10. The right to bizarre trials. Have you ever been so desperate to prove your innocence that you'd grab a red-hot iron bar? In medieval Europe, this wasn't just a figure of speech. It was actual legal procedure. Trial by ordeal was a legitimate way to determine guilt or innocence when evidence was lacking. The accused might be forced to hold burning iron, walk barefoot over hot plowshares, or plunge their hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. If their wounds healed cleanly within 3 days, they were innocent. If the wounds festered, clearly God had identified them as guilty. In England, there was also the charming trial by water, where suspects were bound and tossed into rivers or lakes. The logic? Water, being pure, would reject the guilty, meaning if you sank, congratulations, you were innocent. Of course, by the time they pulled you out, you might have drowned, but at least your reputation remained intact. The Church finally banned these practices in 1215 at the Fourth Lateran Council, though they persisted in some regions for centuries afterward. Perhaps even more bizarre was trial by combat, literally fighting your accuser to the death to prove your innocence. This wasn't just for knights or noblemen. Ordinary citizens could engage in judicial duels too. In some regions, women, the elderly, and the disabled could hire champions to fight on their behalf. Imagine having to maintain a good relationship with the town's best fighter, just in case someone accused you of stealing their chickens. Number 9. Fashion police with real power. Think today's fashion critics are harsh? In medieval times, wearing the wrong clothes could literally land you in prison. Sumptuary laws strictly regulated who could wear what based on social class, and these laws were enforced with surprising vigor. In 14th century England, King Edward III decreed that only royalty could wear purple silk or gold cloth. Commoners attempting to dress above their station faced hefty fines, imprisonment, and having their fancy clothes confiscated on the spot. Meanwhile, in medieval France, only nobles could wear fur, particularly squirrel and ermine. Imagine being arrested because your coat was too fancy. These laws weren't just about maintaining social hierarchy. They were serious economic policy. In many cases, they were designed to reduce foreign imports and promote local industry. Venice had particularly strict laws prohibiting excessive display of jewelry and luxurious fabrics, partly to curb conspicuous consumption that might offend God, but also to ensure Venetians weren't sending too much money abroad for exotic goods. Perhaps the strangest fashion law of all came from medieval England, where a 1363 statute dictated the precise length of men's jackets based on their social class. Apparently, short jackets were considered obscene, and only the nobility could show off their legs. Merchants caught with their jackets too high, above the knee, faced public humiliation and fines, the medieval equivalent of getting ticketed for sagging pants. Number 8. Bathroom laws that defy belief. Did you know there were actual laws governing where and when you could relieve yourself in medieval times? Before modern plumbing, waste disposal was a community concern that required surprising legal oversight. In medieval London, it was illegal to empty your chamber pot out the window without first shouting "Gardez-vous," from the French garde à l'eau, meaning watch out for the water. This warning gave pedestrians enough time to jump out of the way, or, more likely, huddle against a building to avoid the splatter zone. Some medieval European towns had laws specifying how deep outhouses had to be dug and how far they needed to be from wells and neighbors' property. Breaking these regulations could result in fines or being forced to relocate your necessary house. In parts of Germany, town officials known as dung inspectors would actually check that waste disposal met community standards. Medieval monasteries often had the most sophisticated bathroom situations, with elaborate stone latrines built over running water. But even these holy settings had strict rules. Some monastery regulations specified that monks couldn't spend too long in the latrine, as it might indicate sloth or provide opportunities for inappropriate conversations. Some abbey records show monks being disciplined for bathroom-related infractions, including one poor brother who was punished for excessive flatulence during Vespers. Speaking of bodily functions, in medieval England, it was allegedly a crime to refuse permission for someone to use your bathroom facilities in an emergency. The law recognized that when nature calls, sometimes you just can't make it to a public latrine. Hospitality extended to the most basic human needs, and refusing a desperate traveler the use of your facilities was considered not only rude but potentially actionable. Number 7. Animal trials and punishments. Can animals commit crimes? According to medieval law, absolutely. Some of the strangest medieval legal proceedings were actual criminal trials of animals, complete with defense attorneys, prosecutors, and legal punishments. Between the 13th and 17th centuries, there are records of pigs, cows, dogs, rats, and even insects being put on trial for various offenses. In 1386, in Falaise, France, a pig was convicted of murdering and partially consuming an infant. The pig was sentenced to death, and in a bizarre twist of justice, was dressed in human clothes before being publicly hanged. The execution cost the local government the equivalent of several weeks' pay for a skilled laborer, as they had to hire a professional executioner and provide new gloves so he wouldn't be tainted by touching the criminal pig. Rats faced collective prosecution in several documented cases. When rats destroyed crops in a region of France in the 16th century, they were summoned to court. When none appeared, surprise, their appointed defense attorney argued they couldn't attend due to the dangers of the journey and the presence of cats along the way. The judge apparently found this argument compelling and granted the rats additional time to appear. The case was eventually dismissed when the rodent defendants continued their no-show streak. Perhaps most bizarrely, communities would sometimes excommunicate or anathematize swarms of locusts, caterpillars, and other crop-destroying pests. Church courts would issue formal ecclesiastical censures against these creatures, complete with proper legal procedures. In one Italian case, a group of beetles was ordered to relocate to a specially designated area where they could live without bothering humans. Whether the beetles complied with this judicial order went unrecorded. The most extensive animal trial on record took place in 1545 in France, where an entire colony of weevils was prosecuted for destroying vineyards. The insects were assigned a defense lawyer, who argued so effectively that the judge ordered the townspeople to set aside land elsewhere for the weevils to live, a sort of insect reservation as a compromise solution. Number 6. Marital laws that boggle the mind. Did you know that in medieval Europe you could be legally married just by promising to be? Before the Council of Trent in 1563, which finally required marriages to be performed by a priest with witnesses, a simple verbal agreement between consenting people was often enough to create a binding marriage. These clandestine marriages caused endless legal headaches, especially when one party later denied the arrangement or married someone else in a church ceremony. Some regions had a concept called hand fasting, where couples could enter a trial marriage for a year and a day. If at the end of this period they were compatible, or if the woman became pregnant, the arrangement became permanent. If they weren't satisfied, they could simply part ways with no divorce necessary. Imagine modern dating, if this law still existed. Medieval England had particularly strange laws regarding widows. A widow was entitled to free bench, meaning rights to her husband's property, but in some regions she could forfeit these rights if she remarried or was caught in sexual misconduct. In the manor of Tortworth in Gloucestershire, a widow who committed fornication could redeem her property rights by riding backward on a black ram to the manor court, reciting a rhyming confession that began, "Here I am, riding upon a black ram like a whore as I am." Perhaps most bizarre were laws concerning impotence as grounds for annulment. If a wife claimed her husband couldn't perform his marital duties, courts might order a trial by Congress, where the couple would be required to perform sexually in front of court-appointed experts, usually medical professionals and mature matrons. In some regions, this barification might be limited to physical examination, but in others, the couple was required to demonstrate the act itself. Fortunately, for the privacy-conscious, this practice was relatively rare and gradually disappeared as courts found less invasive ways to resolve such disputes. Number 5. Taxation that defies logic. Think your taxes are complicated? Medieval taxation reached levels of absurdity that would make modern tax codes seem straightforward. In medieval England, King Henry I established a tax on beards, effectively making facial hair a luxury item. Several centuries later, Elizabeth I revived this concept with a tax on anyone sporting a beard longer than 2 weeks, with the rate varying depending on the beard wearer's social status. Medieval Russia went even further with beard taxation. Peter the Great, determined to modernize his country, imposed a hefty beard tax in 1698. Those who paid received a beard token, a small copper or silver coin inscribed with the words, "The beard is a superfluous burden," that they were required to carry at all times to prove they'd paid their facial hair dues. In England, window taxes led wealthy homeowners to brick up perfectly good windows just to avoid the fee. Many buildings still show evidence of this tax avoidance strategy today. The logic behind taxing windows. They were visible from outside, making them easy to count without having to enter the property. And they served as a rough proxy for wealth. Bigger houses had more windows. Perhaps the most bizarre medieval tax was France's salt tax, or gabelle. Salt was essential for preserving food in an era without refrigeration, making it a necessity for survival. Yet the French monarchy established a royal monopoly on salt and required each household to purchase a minimum amount annually at an inflated price, whether they needed it or not. Different regions paid wildly different rates, creating a thriving black market in salt smuggling. This hated tax continued until the French Revolution, when it was abolished as one of the most oppressive symbols of the old regime. Medieval England had a tax called Peter's Pence that required each household with a chimney to pay a penny to the Pope. Tax collectors would literally count the chimneys in a village to determine how much was owed. This led to people bricking up chimneys or having multiple families share a single hearth to avoid the tax, creating terrible fire hazards and smoky living conditions just to save a few pennies. Number 4. Bizarre commerce and trade regulations. Would you believe medieval cities had laws dictating exactly how wide bread loaves should be? Guild regulations controlled nearly every aspect of production, from the exact composition of sausages to the precise number of threads allowed in a yard of cloth. Breaking these rules didn't just result in fines, it could lead to spectacular public punishments. Bakers in medieval England who sold underweight bread could be dragged through town on a sledge with the offending loaf tied around their neck. Repeat offenders might be placed in the pillory where customers could pelt them with rotten food. In some German towns, fraudulent bakers were placed in a large basket, attached to a long pole and repeatedly dunked in a river or pond. a punishment called the baker's baptism. Medieval trade laws were obsessively concerned with preventing merchants from cornering markets. In many towns, it was illegal for traders to purchase goods before they reached the public marketplace, a practice called forestalling. Similarly, engrossing, buying large quantities to resell at higher prices, and regrading, buying goods in a market and reselling them in the same market at a higher price, were serious crimes. These anti-speculation laws were enforced by market officials who had the authority to inspect goods, verify weights and measures, and impose on-the-spot penalties. Perhaps the strangest commercial regulations involved the assizes that fixed prices for essential goods. The assize of bread and ale, first promulgated in the 13th century in England, established a sliding scale relating the price of bread to the price of grain. When grain prices rose, bakers weren't allowed to raise the price of bread. Instead, they were required to reduce the size of loaves according to a precise mathematical formula. This created the bizarre situation where bread sizes fluctuated constantly while prices remained fixed by law. In some medieval German towns, beer quality was regulated by the beer ordeal. Officials would pour beer on a wooden bench, then sit on it while wearing leather pants. If the bench was sticky enough to make the inspector's pants stick to it when he tried to stand, the beer passed the test. It contained enough malt and wasn't watered down. Brewers whose beer failed this sticky bench test faced substantial fines. Number 3. Recreational laws that time forgot. Did you know that football was once illegal? Medieval kings repeatedly banned the sport, considering it a dangerous distraction from archery practice. Edward II issued the first football ban in 1314, complaining about the great noise in the city caused by hustling over large balls, and subsequent monarchs reinforced the prohibition. Despite these laws, medieval football, a chaotic game with few rules, unlimited participants, and frequent injuries, remained stubbornly popular. Bowling faced similar restrictions. In 1366, Edward III prohibited handball, football, or hockey, coursing and cockfighting, or other such idle games, partly to ensure men focused on archery crucial for England's military strength. Henry VIII later continued this tradition by banning common people from bowling except at Christmas, and even then only in their master's presence. The nobility, of course, could bowl whenever they pleased. Games of chance faced particularly severe restrictions. Dice games were repeatedly outlawed, with medieval authorities believing they led to blasphemy, violence, and poverty. Professional dice players faced harsh punishments. In some European towns, they might have their hand pierced with a dagger or nail. Playing cards, which appeared in Europe around the 14th century, quickly joined the list of regulated games with various localities, restricting when and where they could be played. Perhaps the most unusual recreational law concerned the practice of church ales fundraising events where parishes brewed and sold ale to support church maintenance. While church authorities promoted these events, they had to establish strict rules about appropriate behavior. Church court records show people being disciplined for dancing in the churchyard, playing disruptive games during religious services, or turning church ales into rowdy parties. Some parishes had detailed regulations specifying exactly how many musicians could play at church ales and what time the drinking had to end. Medieval Christmas celebrations were subject to particularly strange regulations. The tradition of appointing a lord of misrule to oversee holiday festivities created a sanctioned period of chaos where normal social rules were temporarily inverted. However, town authorities still established boundaries on appropriate misrule. Records show fines for those who took the licensed disorder too far, particularly for damaging property or conducting mock religious ceremonies that crossed the line into blasphemy. Number 2. Personal hygiene legislation. Would you believe there were actual laws about how often you could bathe? Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did value cleanliness, but public bathhouses became targets of regulation due to their reputation as centers for prostitution and disease transmission. After the Black Death, many European towns restricted bathhouse operations, with some requiring them to close during disease outbreaks. In medieval London, bathhouse operators had to close their establishments by sunset and were prohibited from serving food or drink, rules aimed at preventing them from functioning as disguised brothels. Some towns required bathhouse keepers to refuse service to anyone with visible skin conditions, creating an early form of public health screening. Personal grooming faced surprising regulations as well. In medieval England, men in certain professions were required to be clean-shaven as a mark of their trade. Conversely, Jewish men were often legally required to wear beards to distinguish them visually from Christians. When beard taxes were introduced, these conflicting requirements created legal contradictions that courts struggled to resolve. Perhaps the most intimate hygiene laws concerned bodily odors. In crowded medieval cities, particularly strong personal smells could actually violate nuisance laws. Court records from several English towns show cases where individuals were fined for emitting odors that neighbors found intolerable. Tanners, butchers, and others working with animal products faced specific regulations about where they could conduct their smelly businesses, with many towns relegating these trades to designated districts downwind of population centers. Some medieval towns even had smell inspectors who would investigate complaints about noxious odors and determine if they violated local ordinances. These officials had the authority to order immediate remediation, which might involve anything from disposing of rotting materials to requiring someone to bathe. In extreme cases, particularly, malodorous individuals could be temporarily banished from public spaces until they addressed their hygiene issues. Number 1. Laws about speech and expression. Ever been told to watch your language? In medieval times, certain words could literally land you in prison. Blasphemy laws were enforced with surprising vigor, with penalties ranging from fines to having your tongue pierced with a hot iron for repeat offenders. What constituted blasphemy varied widely by region. In some areas, simply saying, "By God's bones," was enough to earn punishment. Slander had its own bizarre legal framework. In many medieval communities, those found guilty of spreading harmful rumors were required to publicly recant their statements while holding a candle of specific weight and quality. The more serious the slander, the heavier and more expensive the candle. In some cases, the slanderer had to process through town declaring, "I have lied," at regular intervals. Perhaps the strangest speech regulations concerned singing. Many medieval towns had ordinances prohibiting certain songs deemed lewd or politically dangerous. Court records show people fined for singing songs that mocked local officials or contained lyrics considered immoral. In medieval London, the night watchman had authority to arrest anyone singing inappropriate songs after curfew. Political speech faced particularly severe restrictions. Criticizing the monarch could constitute treason, a capital offense. Even discussing certain political topics was dangerous. After Richard II's deposition in 1399, simply mentioning that he might still be alive carried serious legal penalties. The concept of seditious speech was so broadly defined that almost any criticism of authority could potentially be punished. Medieval universities had their own bizarre speech regulations. Students at the University of Paris were prohibited from speaking anything but Latin within college walls. Those caught speaking French faced disciplinary action, including being denied meals in the college dining halls. The prohibition extended even to casual conversations between friends, creating an artificial Latin-only environment intended to immerse students in the scholarly language. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live under laws that regulated every aspect of your existence, from your beard length to the specific words you could say? How would your daily life change if wearing the wrong color could get you arrested, or if your dog could be put on trial for stealing a loaf of bread?